So I have Harlan Margolis and crew to thank from Rhythm Collision for offering me that interview and making that happen. And
Well,
that was the summer of '97.
speaking of that, I remember when I wrote my first story for Mean Street and I submitted it to you, and then a check came in the mail, and I emailed you on it. I was like, I didn't know I was getting paid for this,
Oh, yeah,
and you wrote
yeah.
back, and you were like, well then you were kidding. You're like, well then give it back. So that's I don't remember who
Yeah,
my
so
first story was, but that's but then you kind of started there, but then like you took it over, right? Like
no, yeah. So summer of '97, I'm a contributing writer. Then, as part of my major, finishing up my bachelor's degree in communications with an emphasis in journalism, we had to do an internship. And I thought, well, what better place to do an internship than the magazine I love, the magazine I've been writing for? And so, summer of '98, I believe, is when I start my internship at Main Street. And it was only supposed to be for 1 quarter, but I end up interning there all throughout summer of '98, and for about an entire year and some change, I was an intern over there, and I had so much fun interning there. It was just incredible because they were putting me on assignments. I was going out and interviewing people in the studio now, and I was going doing concert reviews, and I was doing a lot more than just interviewing bands. I was getting to see the production and the process of how the magazine comes together. And I was also helping out in the office. I was doing all kinds of things in the office too. It wasn't just writing. It was, learning how to do some more graphics, working with Photoshop and working with, I think back then we were on Quark Express or maybe even PageMaker. So I was learning that software, from the professionals in a sense here, and just kind of learning the ropes of, working with publicists and getting interviews and how to request for that, and how the magazine all comes together. And then in the summer of '99, I was promoted to a part-time assistant editor position. And so they basically said, look, you've been interning here long enough, and we think that, we'd like to go ahead and just start paying you and giving you a regular check for being here. And I thought, that sounds great, sure. So it was a part time assistant editor position.
at
And
this
I
time,
believe
are
I,
you writing for other outlets and for like other
yeah, I
stuff,
started
or
picking up other outlets right about this time, actually. It was about '98, '99 when I started sending my clips out. One of my favorite magazines that I had been reading since the early 1990s was Modern Drummer magazine. So I started sending some clips out that I wrote. I did some individual interviews with musicians for Mean Street who happened to be drummers. And I sent those clips to Modern Drummer magazine, and they were really excited to have me on board. So I started becoming a contributing writer to Modern Drummer magazine, which for me was also a real big dream come true because, again, I had been reading Modern Drummer, and somebody who was a drummer already for several years at that point, it was really exciting. So I ended up becoming the editor in chief of Mean Street in the summer of 2000. So everything kind of happened in these summers here. So a year after I was assistant editor, J.R. Griffin moved on. He actually moved on to E, and they had E Online. He was became an editor for E Online at that point, and he said, "Look, I'm leaving, and if you want this position, let me know, and we can talk about it." And I said, "Of course, I'd love
sorry?
to." And at that point, I had just graduated, or I was about to graduate with my bachelor's degree. Walk, actually, not exactly graduate. I had a few units hanging over my head, but and so I finished pretty much my degree at that point, and it was perfect timing because he was leaving, and so I took over. I think it was either May or June of 2000 is when I took over as editor in chief of Main Street. And so that was kind of the connection as I moved my way through.
And how
And
long were you the editor in chief of Mean
I
Street?
was editor in chief of Main Street for just over 5 years. So
Okay.
I left in the summer of 2005. And the whole time, of course, I had a wonderful experience doing that. It was a wonderful opportunity for me fresh out of college. I was very much ensconced in the music scene, too. I was still playing a lot. I was still going to a lot of shows. I was still connected to a lot of people in the local music scene. So for me, I felt like there couldn't have been a better place and a better time and a better job for me fresh out of college than at Main Street.
So, two questions. Was Mean Street before it became Mean Street? Was it BAM or no? They're not two
No,
totally different
they were
magazines.
not connected in any way. BAM was actually Mean Street's kind of competitor throughout the mid 90s or so. BAM, I think, and I could be wrong, originated from the Bay Area.
Okay.
And again, I could be wrong, but it may even have the letters BAM. Don't quote me on this in the sense here. I could be totally off base. So I'm just going to say this, take this with a grain of salt. I believe it may have even the acronym may have stood for Bay Area Music, but I'm not even positive on that end too. But no, BAM was in the racks, right next to Mean Street. You'd go to record stores or venues, and you'd see BAM and you'd see Mean Street right next to each other. Sometimes we even had the same band on the cover for that month, and so people sometimes even thought it was the same magazine. Sometimes even the same photo of the same band right next to each other. But BAM, I believe. Uh, they left Southern California. It would have been around 1999 or so. But so by the time I took over as editor in chief, BAM was not around in Southern California at that point. But no, Mean Street was its own independent company. It was not owned by any larger company and did not really have any connections to other publications at that point.
So when you become editor in chief, like, was your goal like I want to cover as much of this music scene as possible? Like did you have like a personal like within yourself, just a personal mandate of I want to, this is how I want to make my mark, or what was
Yeah,
your thoughts?
I again coming from the local scene as a local musician, as somebody who was playing in bands locally, I really wanted to help my fellow bands in the scene. To me that was very important. I wanted to ensure that they got coverage, but we also had the pressure to uh, cover larger artists as well, and we wanted to ensure that there was a kind of a mix of who's hot right now as far as larger artists are concerned, and also who's kind of coming up in the scene and in the
And
area.
when you say larger, do you mean larger within underground music, or do you mean larger as in Madonna and
Yeah, we didn't go pop very heavily, but larger kind of in the mainstream rock era arena, I should say. So we were covering artists who were very well known at the time. I mean, we were covering Radiohead, and we were covering bands of that stature, and interviewing them, putting them on the cover. So we had bands that we were putting on the cover who were major label bands who had hit songs who were all over MTV and K Rock. So those are the bands that we typically would put on the cover. But then, if you flip through the magazine, you would also see a lot of local artists who came from Orange County, the Inland Empire, from LA County, from Ventura or Santa Barbara counties, San Bernardino and Riverside area, San Diego, of course, as well. So we were trying to, encapsulate as much of the area as we could through our coverage, but also, have several kind of what I would call the anchor bands that we put on the cover that would really draw in a more mainstream audience. And my idea was we'll draw them in with those mainstream covers. We'll put Blink 182 on the cover. We'll put Radiohead on the cover. We'll put Incubus on the cover. But we'll then also, when they flip through the pages, they'll see a lot of smaller bands that will come from Orange County or from Riverside or from LA, and maybe get to know about some of these smaller artists as well. So I saw those larger artists as kind of being the gateway, and people would pick up the magazine and then flip through and see some more local artists too. So I didn't have a well-defined plan when I took over as editor in chief. I mean, for the first few months, I was just trying to make sure that the magazine came out, and I was keeping things running in a sense here. But I think later on, I did start to develop more of a plan. We changed some sections around. We added some new content. I started to push a little bit more for design. Mean Street initially, when I took over, was a lot of text with a small box of a photo, and then you'd see another, same thing at page after page after page. And I really wanted to see color. I wanted to see large photos. I wanted to see, things that were attractive and appealing to the eye and had a good design element to them. In addition to having good stories being written about, awesome new music that was coming out, new artists who were really, starting to perform on the scene.